Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a very, very warm welcome to the Aga Khan Museum on this beautiful early spring afternoon. How many of you have heard the birds singing first thing in the morning? Is it not a wonderful sign of life returning? Spring has returned. The earth is like a child that knows poems. That is how Rumi celebrates spring. And I just wanted to share this little poem with you as we are all worrying about things going on. The earth has songs if only we stop and listen. My name is Erika Kamini. I'm the Director of Collections and Public Programs here at the Aga Khan Museum. And before I have the great pleasure of introducing our wonderful speaker and very dear colleague to you today, I would like to remind you that the museum is built on a very special site, a site of culture for thousands of years, and a place of gathering under the stewardship of the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, including the Huron-Wendat, the Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and then, of course, most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. We are grateful for their stewardship and grateful to share the land with them. Marianne Fenton joined our museum in 2017 after a distinguished career as an artist and intellectual working and living in South Africa, in England, and thanks to her now in Canada. She was involved in several international art initiatives, including the Global Experience Project Artist Residency that was hosted by OCAD University, from which she also holds an MA in Contemporary Art History. And since she joined in the museum, she has been leading on 2 internationally acclaimed exhibition projects. The first one was Skate Girls of Kabul, which was hosted here in 2017, a very groundbreaking contemporary photography project around young girls participating in a unique program in Kabul, Afghanistan, called Skatistan, which is an initiative by an international NGO that was founded there in 2009 to encourage girls to take up a new skill, an unusual skill, but also to build their confidence in a difficult environment. Since last year, Marianne has been working on her latest and very timely curatorial project we are talking about today, and which is on display in the atrium, Don't Ask Me Where I'm From. This is a collaboration with Luciano Benetton's Imago Mundi Foundation, which is dedicated to fostering dialogue and understanding between cultures and communities, and therefore very much in line with our own mandate and mission. The exhibition involves 15 post-migration artists. That means they were born in one place, raised in another place, now moving between many different cultures and continents, and they are examining through their art the challenges and opportunities to having to bridge these different cultures, both as individual living beings and, of course, also as artists. The exhibitions first opened in Treviso in Italy in November 2019, is now here until mid-April, and is then built to tour across Canada and venues hopefully beyond that. And now please give a very warm welcome to Marianne Fenton.
Thank you, everyone, for coming out on this beautiful day. I'm sure it was a toss-up between the sunshine outside and sitting in the auditorium inside, and I appreciate the commitment to being here today. The number one predictor of your success in today's borderless world is not your IQ, not your resume, not even your expertise. writes social scientist David Livermore in his book, The Cultural Intelligence Difference. It's your CQ. I'm sure you all know about IQ and the often spoken about EQ, but what, might you ask, is CQ? CQ is your cultural intelligence. It is that learned or implicitly understood skill of recognizing that cultural differences lead to different ways of thinking and acting, and therefore responding in different ways, responding in ways that are appropriate to the culture that you're interacting with. Someone with a low CQ might have a tendency to view everyone else's behavior through their own cultural lens, which could, as you can imagine, potentially lead to misunderstandings and communication gaps, despite being able to speak the same language. But I can see that you're asking me, what does this have to do with the 15 artists that are represented in the atrium? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by giving you just a little bit of context and background before I launch into the artists and what they're contributing to this discussion. Ulrike started off by introducing the project and talking about the project that we're doing with the Imago Mundi Foundation in Italy, Imago Mundi being part of the Benetton Foundation. Now, Mr. Benetton, as you well know, was very famous for his clothing line, and in particular was kind of launched into global attention by his very, very interesting and provocative advertising campaign in the 80s and the 90s. But he also has a passion for art. He's an extremely keen art collector and had a vision to create a global archive of art. Now, considering the logistics of a comprehensive art collection that sort of covers the entire globe in some way, what might this look like? In order to do so, he therefore commissioned artists to create very small 10 by 12 centimeter artworks. And he commissioned thousands of artists to do this. As a matter of fact, he has over 26,000 of these individual pieces in his collection. This comes with its own set of challenges. How do you display these works? He overcame that challenge by asking the famous architect Tobias Scarpa to design panels. Now, these panels had two functions. One was, as you can see, to display the works, but the other function was really to travel the works, because if you've got a global art collection, you want to move it around and you want people to be able to see the artworks. When we were introduced to the Benetton Foundation's Imago Mundi collection, we were encouraged to curate an exhibition out of this existing collection of over 26,000 works. However, after much discussion with Mr. Benetton and the Imago Mundi team, it was agreed that we'd sort of shake this up a little bit. And we decided that we will commission 15 artists to create new works that really hinged around a central theme. And the theme that we agreed on was one that we felt was extremely pertinent to our world today, probably second only to climate change, and that is immigration. Both institutions are committed to celebrating the diversity of cultures and peoples, and I'm pleased that we have been able to come together to celebrate creativity inspired by the immigrant experience in this exhibition. Now, given the Aga Khan Museum's ambition to create exhibitions that can be shared beyond the four walls of this museum, Don't Ask Me Where I'm From's thematic parallel to travel and migration, the Imago Mundi panel was really the crucial sort of starting point, because this meant that we can move the exhibition around. Each artist was tasked with creating or adapting existing works that would fit onto a single panel rather than finding 36 artists to fill a single panel. And so the exhibition was born. Here you can see the exhibition installed actually in a traditional way. This is one of a previous version of Imago Mundi at OCAD. I think it was just last year that it was exhibited there. And on the right-hand side, I've included it because it's important to note, are the panels, the crates that the exhibition actually gets transported in. This is relevant to our exhibition because what we did was we told the artists that they could create a work either for a panel or they can create a work using the crates, the luggage, so to speak, of the exhibition. And if you've had a chance to go through the exhibition, or if you do after this, you'll note that some artists choose to use the crate instead in very interesting and innovative ways. Don't Ask Me Where I'm From presents the experiences of artists who represent a global population of people who were raised in a culture other than their own. Other than their parents. The title comes from their lived experience. For the artists, an explanation of where they're from is not an easy answer. It is an elaborate and complex tale. In their lives and in their art, these artists are mediators. They're bridges between cultures. Their hybrid experience allows them to see the world from multiple perspectives, often at the same time. I believe this gives them a unique critical ability and a deep and enduring empathy for ways of looking at the world. Now, being a mediator requires knowledge of both sides of a story, making it an oftentimes challenging position to be in. So you'll notice that many of the artists in the exhibition highlight the challenges inherent in being between cultures, in being in both and neither at the same time. And they explore how this impacts their sense of identity and their sense of belonging. And through the stories they tell, they encourage us to better understand the complexities of being a cultural mediator and the complexities of how identity is constructed in the individual. The exhibition starts with a question about belonging. If you live between cultures, how do you stake a claim to home and belonging? Now, this is not a work in the exhibition. This is, in fact, a triumphal arch, as you will all know, the one in Paris, the Arc de Triomphe. And the first artist in our exhibition really constructs an archway. He's sort of taking the language of these triumphal arches and he's turning it into something rather personal. So, as you know, a triumphal arch is usually constructed as a sign of victory, as a celebration of a nation's various military victories, and often that includes taking over large parcels of land somewhere. Shinpei Takeda, the first artist you'll notice in the exhibition, created the Arc of No Return. In his own words, he says, "When we leave our land, we leave with the hope of returning there with an accolade, an accomplishment, or something else that was not possible at our place of origin, and of being recognized for this great journey. But in reality, deep inside ourselves, we're not returning because of triumph. We just want to come back and feel that we belong to somebody, someplace, something. All we have is our tangled up memories forcefully squeezed into our well-traveled suitcases, in the hope that this place will heal us and help us untangle and organize our memories." This is an interesting artwork because it's constructed out of 3 of the suitcases, so to speak, of the exhibition. 3 of the crates are connected. And what Shinpei did was he bought some canvas in Dusseldorf, Germany, where he spends a large portion of his life. He got string from Mexico, which was where he grew up, and paint that he got from Japan, which is his heritage. He then combined these to create a removable cover for these crates to create this archway. In fact, what he's doing is he's saying he can belong anywhere where he can construct this, and he can carry it with him. He can deconstruct it. It has zippers. It folds up into a small little parcel that then gets placed into the crates. The crates get transported into the new place, and then it gets put up again, and he can walk through and have a sense of belonging. He invites us to walk through and experience that sense of belonging as well. The string on the surface is also interesting because this is something that comes up with a few artists, where they remind us that we're not just individuals that are unconnected to a world, we're actually connected through these myriad of networks to people, to places, to memories, via family, via friends. You can see a close-up here of some of the strings. He's reminding us that we're all entangled together. We can't think that we are separate. Now, why this? Memories come in strange forms, and very often they're attached to objects, things that we hold dear, a wedding ring, a photograph, an old teddy bear that was with our child from the day that they were born and afterwards holds no resemblance to the original, but they're carriers of memory, they're containers for memory. A lot of our artists actually use this notion of objects as containers for memory as they create their artworks. Suke Nakuba is one such artist. She has decided to use a carpet. Now, think about carpets. Carpets travel with families. They create space. They get unrolled in a new place, and that is where home is. And like with Shinpei, I'll start with a quote with her because I think it contextualizes her work. I have a personal relationship with carpets that we grew up with. As we moved cities and homes, they were the only spatial objects that moved with us. There is one carpet in particular, Persian, large, woolen, bluish purple with very fine print, on which we used to play marbles. It was a territory on which the glass balls traveled and claimed space. For this exhibition, I thought that a rug is an apt object to make for a traveling show. It would be rolled and unrolled to cover the exhibition panels in every location. After putting the initial proposal for the show together, I realized that the grapes resembled marbles. This is Sukena's piece. So she's using the language of rugs, but it's created out of a very contemporary material. It's made out of latex. And as you can see, the round shapes on there, which remind us of the marbles, are actually halved grapes. And much like carpets, in actual fact, if you go through our permanent gallery and you see our beautiful Wagner carpet on display, you'll note that carpets are not just the material, they're actually also the pattern, and the meaning gets carried through in the pattern. So it's not, and beyond the pattern, it's the memories that they hold. So there are multiple layers that get carried away or carried with the carpet. In this instance, Sukena has done exactly that. She's given us a carpet that gets unrolled in every new location and creates home where it's at. But the carpet itself holds very, very specific messages. The grapes refer to a story by a medieval scholar and writer called Ibn Battuta. He wrote a story called The Man Who Was Killed by a Grape. Now, brace yourselves for this story. I hope you have full stomachs. Anyway, the story that he tells is one of a prince who goes to a neighboring country to visit his father-in-law, the king. It's a long journey, and of course he gets hungry and thirsty, and as he's approaching his final destination, there's a beautiful vineyard on the side of the road, and he decides to pick a grape from this vineyard. He eats the grape and continues on in his journey and arrives at the king. The king, in the meantime, has heard of the fact that this young prince, has eaten a grape, and he accuses him of stealing a grape and decides to make an example of this prince by cutting him in half, displaying his halves on either side of the road alongside two halves of a grape. Now, what on earth does this story have to do with anything? But think carefully. This is a cautionary tale. This is reminding us that travelers, that strangers that come into new cultural spaces don't always know the rules of engagement. And a very, very simple misstep could have dire consequences. So that's the one part of the story that reminds us about this difficult position of immigrants and migrants as they travel across countries and across spaces that are culturally different. The other is, of course, the background of the carpet. You'll notice that it's camouflage. Now, camouflage can relate to two different things at the very least. Firstly, military occupation and the reason for migration on mass scale. And the other, of course, what happens when immigrants come into a new country is they try to camouflage themselves culturally into a space so that they become less noticeable and feel more comfortable where they're at, where less people are asking them where they are from, potentially. Another artist that considers some of this is Maria Nemchenko, and you'll notice that it's sort of a tale of two carpets. Maria also has carpets in the background. In this instance, Russians or Ukrainians would immediately recognize wall-hung carpets. This is a family photograph from her family archive, and in fact, it's her mother holding a baby Maria in her arms. But you'll notice a secondary carpet over it. Over their faces and over their identities is plastered another carpet. Look closer, and you'll notice that it is constructed of things like vodka bottles, kebabs, potatoes, pickles, any number of things that are stereotypically associated with Russians. Maria is telling us that what often happens and what she's experienced is that her identity is covered up by this secondary stereotyped identity that is in fact applied to her. It's stuck over her, and it becomes something that's quite challenging to escape from. So identity isn't just constructed by the self, but it's something that can be given to someone, potentially against their will. Huda Tajuman, who is Moroccan with Swiss-Syrian parents and lives in Morocco still, created a work called The Road Less Traveled. It is actually multiple small pieces. There are paintings and there is a sculpture. As you can imagine from her background, she has always felt that she floats between cultures. So all of her works, certainly all of the ones that are here, are floating. It's a floating piece of land. It's solid, but actually it's also ephemeral and in the air. She does what the others do too, in that she refers to actual objects that travel with people. For example, the chair. A chair that contains memories of family and friends sitting around a dining table, talking and laughing and discussing, or maybe arguing even, but memories are contained in these objects. The tree indicates rootedness, and yet it's floating, it's unrooted. She feels that she belongs to all of these spaces and none of them at the same time. Another artist, Daniela Edberg, who's Mexican-American, also looks at objects, but this is kind of a little bit different. She's looking at material culture in a different way, in that she constructs these things rather than finds them. Her work is based around this single little crocheted object, which is meant to represent something called cheatgrass or Bromus tectorum. Cheatgrass was brought into the Americas from Europe in the late 1800s and has systematically started taking over steppe vegetation in Western America. In fact, it's quite so successful and happy there that it has managed to annihilate huge swathes of indigenous plants. Now, why that? This is the way the work was installed in Italy. You'll see our installation is slightly different. But what she's done is she has also included what is meant to, in fact, be the root system of this plant, which was knitted out of alpaca wool. Alpaca being another animal that was transplanted from South America into Central and North America. This root system threatens to overtake. It threatens to sort of almost strangle everything in its path. The photographs are of young Mexican Americans, young people whose cultures are multiple. They sit between two cultures, and each of them is holding another crocheted object or created object, either a stone, one has got a hurricane as hair, another one is holding some cheatgrass. All these are objects that travel across borders and boundaries. No one tells a hurricane to stop blowing at a certain point. It doesn't care what a political boundary is and where that arbitrary boundary was set up. So what she's doing is she's questioning boundaries and she's looking at how people move. Who do we have the right to call to say belongs versus who does not belong? What is the language that we use when we speak of these people? We use things like aliens, illegal aliens, much like alien vegetation. It's a little bit of a warning, and it reminds us to be very cautious about how we apply words to people and what that means. This artist you know, and is sadly not part of our exhibition, Frida Kahlo. One of the other themes that comes up in our exhibition is really about the stories that we tell about ourselves, about our families, where and how we belong, and what our identities are. Many artists do this. They look at photographs, they look at their own histories, family histories, in order to construct their identity. Kimmo Hollom is one such artist. He is, in fact, here today. He's just walked through the door. Guy's work, Charafna, is kind of a very complex installation. It consists of photographs. It consists of these beautiful wax little sculptures that have photographs embedded in them. And what you don't see here is it also consists of video. This complex work has multiple different layers. But one of the layers that I want to sort of pick out today, above others, is really this idea of memory. Guy says, memories, like a garden, need to be watered, fertilized, and harvested. Our Lebanese memories were never fluent in our family, with the same handful of tales used often to underline how lucky we are. My experience in Lebanon and its traces triggered a whole new approach to my father's recollections from his youth in Lebanon, loaded with new, complex stories that intertwine directly with our life in the present. I may not have lived those experiences, but those memories are mine too. In a way, I've helped them to resurface, and they've helped make me who I am. Guy later in life went back to Lebanon. He had never been in Lebanon. He grew up in Brazil because his father and mother immigrated almost 60 years ago, right? So going back to Lebanon was a way of piecing together the stories that his parents had told. It was fleshing out memories. Now, an interesting thing that I realized that I hadn't thought about before was that we all have memories, and sometimes those memories are our memories, and sometimes those memories are other people's memories. And those memories also become ours. Family stories that are told of events in the past, family stories told about funny events that happen when holidays happen that you may not even have been born to be present. And those stories are like memories, but they're always with gaps. So Guy went back and started filling out some of those gaps, and in so doing was able to piece together his own identity in a way that wouldn't have been possible had he just stayed in Brazil. Another artist who does something similar is Alia Shah. She is one of our local Canadian artists, and her work, called Looking for Lucille, considers her grandmother. She'd never met her grandmother, who was born and grew up in Guyana, and she'd never been to Guyana, so she made a trip to Guyana. Her work similarly is composed of different elements. There are sewn elements, there are photographs, there's even a sound piece with ambient sound from Guyana. She went to visit her grandmother's home. She went into the house that she grew up in and looked through the window that her grandmother would have looked out of to see the view that her grandmother would have seen. She also includes things like a passport, other ways of identifying people, maybe more kind of political, structural ways of giving someone a specific identity. And she combines that with the other softer things like the fact that her grandmother was a seamstress, and so she has these lovely round pieces in which she sewed the river systems of Guyana. All of this enabled her to not only better understand her grandmother, but to be able to connect with her past and therefore with herself in a way that she wasn't able to do until now. And stories continue even further. Personal stories come in different shapes and sizes, and Tangi Nkosi tells another kind of story. Tangiwe grew up in the US. She was born in the US, and her parents are from South Africa. And she tells of how her parents always referred to South Africa as home. So as someone growing up in the US, she always felt that home was elsewhere. Home wasn't where she was, and she needed to find that home. She is now living back in South Africa and realized that actually home is far more complex than that. And the South Africa that she thought she was going to find, this home that was constructed through the stories that were told by her parents and visitors, somehow wasn't the home that she anticipated. And she started contemplating, what stories do we tell our children? What do we tell them about where they belong and who they are? And the power of those stories to give us a sense of who we are and what our identity is. The lovely video that she created is one in which she goes into the stories of her family. She tells the stories of her mother and her father's migration. Each of them had their own complicated migrations, first one from Europe to Africa, and another one from Zimbabwe to South Africa, and then out of South Africa due to the political climate and into the US. But she goes further and she refers to a Zulu myth that says that all stories come from the sea, thereby saying that we don't just have our own personal stories that give us a sense of identity. There are universal stories that tie us together. There are stories that connect over different cultures. There are also specifically cultural stories that we tell that give us a sense of place and space and belonging. And all of those stories together contribute to who we are and our sense of belonging. Giana Gao also tells stories. Her story starts with a very, very personal side on the right-hand side, and I'll tell you about both in a second, and then moves on to something that is more general, that connects stories together. The small image that's very hard to see, you'll have to go to the exhibition to have a good look at it, is a picture of a little girl sitting in front of a mirror, and her hair is being cut. This is an image of Giana as a 5-year-old who was living in Afghanistan with her parents, and her mother decided to send her out of the country to live with her family in Germany. Just before doing that, she cut Giana's hair off really, really short, like a boy's. Now, I don't know, I've got a 9-year-old, and cutting her hair is a challenge. I have to negotiate every centimeter that gets cut off. A little girl and her long hair is very hard to separate from each other. Their identities are tied so closely with their hair. So Giana found this quite a traumatic experience, and then it was coupled with the fact that it actually preceded her having to leave her family for a period of, I don't know, about 5 years before she saw her parents again. In the meantime, she created another work called For Sitara Hamza, which is the work of what looks like hair on the other side. This is a story that's a tiny bit less personal, but reminds us of the personal associations that we have with hair. It is made up of macrame pieces, hair extensions, and fabric. Macrame was something that originated in the Arabic world and then got transported back into the West, into hippie culture, where it now lives in everyone's minds. It is something that has crossed cultures, something that has moved from one space to another, and where meaning has been translated across time and space. She connects these with hair extensions that she picked up in Pakistan. These are hair extensions used by women when they're going somewhere fancy or they're going to a wedding. They'll add it into their natural hair, braid it in, to create a decorative extension, which also goes back to reminding us of the little girl who lost her hair that would have probably loved to be able to have ready-made hair back again. In addition to this, and referencing the title of the work, is the title For Sitara Hamza, are little bits of fabric in a market in Karachi, she came across a piece of fabric that was clearly created for a very specific person called for Sitara Hamza, or Sitara Hamza. And if you look at the installation, you'll see a piece of fabric that says for Sitara Hamza. And what this does is it makes us wonder, who is this woman? Why did she have this piece of fabric made and not pick it up? And in so doing, she's tying stories together, personal stories, general stories. She's making us think of other people, much like walking down a dark street at night and seeing lights on in people's homes and wondering about the lives that they live, the stories that they lead. And in this work, she's doing that. She's tying her personal story in with general stories. John Young is an Australian Chinese artist, and his stories come in a slightly different form. John Young tells a story about a very, very specific event in the history in Australia. He's digging into the archive to look at the history of Chinese migrants in Australia in particular. This event was really about mining rights, disputed mining rights in a particular place called, what was referred to as Lambing Flat, the Barragong Affray, so in Barragong. And it went sideways very, very dramatically and ended up with violence, people being scalped, and 15,000 Chinese immigrants escaping for their lives. They were eventually harbored on a nearby grazier's farm or piece of land. James Roberts, you can see his name referenced in one of the photographs, who gave them shelter and helped feed them. The thing about this incident is that it wasn't isolated to this moment in history. It actually became the impetus for what in 1901 became the White Australia Act, which limited immigration from specifically Chinese migrants into Australia. This particular act was only abolished in the 70s. So the long tail of something that happened in history that gets interpreted through one particular lens, a lens that ignores other ways of looking at this particular incident, can have dire consequences. But John's doing more than that. He's not just reminding us that we need to see history as something complex and layered and to consider multiple sides of a story. He's also reminding us of the acts of kindness that exist that we so often overlook. The act of kindness by a single grazier called James Roberts, taking in over 1,500 people that he didn't know and probably didn't culturally understand, but had the humanity to feel the need to look after and to provide them with protection. These kind acts exist everywhere and need to be considered, and we need to be reminded of them. Another way that artists consider identity is through language. This work is by an artist called Zineb Zidera, and it's called Mother Tongue. It's not in the exhibition again, but just to show that artists across time have considered this, and certainly recently have considered this idea of language. In this video, on the left is the artist with her mother. The artist lives in France, speaks French to her mother who speaks Arabic, but they both understand each other. In the center, the artist speaks to her daughter. The daughter speaks English, the artist speaks French, but they understand each other. They speak in different languages, but they understand each other. On the right, the daughter speaks English to the grandmother, who's Arabic, and they have no idea what the other one is saying. There are awkward silences, bits of speaking being met with silence on the other end, and the discomfort that that causes. One of our artists, Sarah Maple, explains a similar discomfort in her work. Sarah grew up in England. Her grandmother was from the Punjab. She was never able to speak Punjabi and always had to communicate with her grandmother through either gesture or a very, very limited Punjabi vocabulary. She always regretted this because she felt that she wasn't able to truly, truly connect with her grandmother, truly understand her grandmother or have her grandmother understand her. And after her grandmother's death, she made the decision to begin to learn to speak Punjabi. So she went to Punjabi lessons. Sarah Maple always uses humor in some way to deal with very serious topics, and this is no different. You'll find very standard phrases like, "my name is," and "may I have a receipt?" to other things like, "I am ashamed," "I feel like a bad Muslim," that are all combined into this work. She's taking her lack of language as not only a kind of a challenge in terms of overcoming the differences between her and her grandmother, or being able to understand her grandmother, she's also not able to understand herself because of this lack of language. Erika Kamini also deals with language. This work, called Islands, is made up of petri dishes, and if you look very closely, you'll see that it is a tiny Japanese island that is put on top of what is a kind of an archipelago of text, blue text. And the text is written in Portuguese. Erika grew up in Brazil, so the text is Portuguese, but the island on top is Japanese. And what she's doing is she's combining both her Japanese heritage with her Portuguese heritage to create a new culture, so to speak, in these petri dishes. El Cid, you may all be familiar with. He's usually known for making enormous works on the sides of buildings through his sort of signature technique of calligraffiti, a combination of calligraphy and graffiti. This work of his uses the same text, a text by Stendhal, that says that love is the miracle of civilization, which he used on the Monde Arabe in Paris. It is an interactive work, and it invites viewers to go in and actually twist around the text, create the pattern that these words create. El Cid's works are never really meant to be read. They're meant to be decorative in a way that music affects anyone. They're meant to cross cultures through the musicality of the line. He was always concerned about either being Tunisian or being French, and ultimately realized that he doesn't have to choose one or the other. He can be both. And this work sort of plays with this idea of two sides that can be twisted around and combined into a single unit. And lastly, before I talk very briefly about our last two artists, identity, something that I've spoken about all the way through. Is it fixed? Is it fluid? What is identity? What is cultural identity? Is it something that is immutable and unchangeable and fixed in time and space, or certainly in space even though it moves through time? What happens to it? And I thought that this quote by the very famous Stuart Hall was really interesting. Identity is not as transparent and as unproblematic as we think. Perhaps instead of thinking of identity as already accomplished historical fact, we should think instead of identity as production, which is never complete, always in process, and always constituted within, not outside representation. Elena Al-Asmar certainly considers this in her work, Arioso Operosa. Her work is constructed of photocopies on A4 paper. And again, she does what many other of the artists does, is she uses an object that's in existence that has traveled with her family, in this instance lace, and she photocopies it over and over and over and over and over again. Now, as you may know, if you have photocopied the same thing over and over and over again, things don't necessarily end up the way they started. Dark areas become darker, light areas become lighter, things shift and change. The original object is still the same, but there is a shifting, there is a movement. And so too, culture, mythology, identity shifts subtly over time. We can't begin to think that national identity is something that's fixed. We can't think that personal identity is something that's fixed. All these things shift and move. And Liberty Batson our final artist. I like to end on her because I feel that so many of the artists talk about the challenges, and what she does is she gives us a sense of agency. Her work is very much inspired by Sol LeWitt and his idea of instructional artworks, in which he gives the audience to a gallery or a museum a set of instructions, and he tasks them with creating a work. Those works never look the same if they're created in different spaces, because people interpret even simple instructions in different ways. And Liberty does that with this work. Her work is a game that doesn't have winning or losing, but certainly a game. She gives instructions, she tells us to move the pieces around, and ultimately every single person's choices determine what the outcome is. She'll say things like, pick up your favorite color. My favorite color is maybe different to your favorite color. And some of these triangles have different colors in a single one. So everyone can construct something that looks completely different. We all have agency. We all make choices in terms of how we determine our identity and how we move forward. These artists all give us a glimpse into the complexities of living in two or more worlds simultaneously. This is not always an easy position to be in. But all of these artists say with confidence that they have valuable insights into multiple ways of looking and thinking. I would argue that they have exceptionally high CQs, and they provide us with a model of how to approach the globalized world, where being open to understanding other ways of doing and thinking is not just a luxury, it's an imperative if we're to engage in our world as mediators and peacemakers. This, too, I believe, is the valuable core of what we as a museum stand for being a bridge between cultures, and as we strive to overcome clashes that are primarily born of ignorance. I'd like to close with a quote by Huda Tajuman. She says, "The migrant feels eternally foreigner and native, but at the same time, this condition develops empathy, open-mindedness, and strength. I believe that those are the very qualities our divided world is in desperate need of." Thank you.